Intensity, drive, and resilience propelled Harbaugh.
The 49ers are going to the Super Bowl. Hail, hail, Michigan. They are
However,
the champions of
behind the championship trophies and his ruthless intensity, a dark side lurked.
I guarantee it. We'll beat Ohio State and we'll be in Pasadena on January 1st.
But during an NBC production meeting, Harbaugh showed up uninvited and confronted Kelly. Harbaugh and Kelly went into a room. I hit him. I threw a couple of punches.
I'm not going to put 47 guys' careers in the hand of somebody who thinks he knows more than I know.
They don't seem very happy with each other.
Harbaugh goes crazy on the sideline.
Richard Sherman's beef with Jim Harbaugh and had a larger impact than any of us knew at the time.
Watch what happens next. There's a quick handshake between Harbaugh and Jim Schwartz. Schwartz says something to him briefly, and then this ensues.
Frustration building for Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh just threw his entire play sheet, and they threw a flag on it.
He is investigating the Michigan football program amid allegations of sign stealing.
Some sources told me yesterday they feel like they have very strong evidence against Jim Harbaugh.
Inside the 20, what a kickoff return, 109 yards and a touchdown.
7, if you're expecting to hear our friend Jim Nantz, half the power in New Orleans Stadium, the Superdome here, is out.
One morning before school, Jim's father, Jack, led him out of the house and said, "No car today, we're walking." He handed him a basketball and got him working on 100 dribbles with the right hand, followed by 100 with the left hand. And while they walked to school, Jim dribbling a basketball, he asked him,
Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
When he got to Michigan as a player in 1982, Jim quickly earned himself a nickname, and not the most glamorous nickname at that. He was nicknamed Hairball, a term his loudest skeptics still use for him whenever publicizing their feelings about the legendary coach. Hairball was a loud and lippy quarterback who made his presence known as a player at Michigan before he'd had a chance to prove himself on the field. He had a level of confidence that was controversial. He started for 3 seasons, and in 1986, his confidence in the rivalry against Ohio State led to him guaranteeing the Wolverines would win.
We're going to play in the Rose Bowl this year. I guarantee it. We'll beat Ohio State and we'll be in Pasadena on January 1st.
The claim was bold, somewhat outlandish, but Harbaugh backed it up, and Michigan won the game 26-24. The Michigan quarterback had an exceptional season in 1986, winning the MVP of the Big Ten and finishing 3rd in Heisman Trophy voting. He was voted into the first team All-Big Ten, and his playing style and ability as a passer garnered plenty of attention in the NFL.
The 54th Annual National Football League Selection Meeting is now in session.
After spending the first several seasons of his career with the Chicago Bears, Harbaugh signed with the Indianapolis Colts as a free agent. Some weren't sold on Harbaugh as the starting quarterback in Indianapolis, including long-term draft analyst Mel Kiper. Kiper doomed the Colts in 1994, mocking them for passing on Trent Dilfer when all they had at quarterback was Jim Harbaugh.
But to pass up a Trent Dilfer when all you have is Jim Harbaugh, give me a break. That's why the Colts are picking second every year in the draft, not battling for the Super Bowl like other clubs in the National Football League.
The quarterback never retaliated, but Colts GM Bill Tobin had plenty to say about it.
After who in the hell is Mel Kiper in a way? Mel Kiper has no more credentials to do what he's doing than my neighbor, and my neighbor's a postman, and he doesn't even have season tickets to the NFL.
He praised Harbaugh as a competitor, and the Colts QB responded by taking the team all the way to the AFC Championship game in the 1995 season, just one faded catch away from heading to the Super Bowl. He finished second in the MVP race, won the NFL's Comeback Player of the Year award, and was voted to the Pro Bowl. He led the NFL in passer rating and proved his doubters wrong. There's a theme that seems to follow Jim Harbaugh, and that's not to underestimate his competitiveness or scoff at his toughness. A couple of years later, a notorious incident would take place between Harbaugh and a former QB, now turned analyst, Jim Kelly.
Harbaugh's out because of the scuffle with Jim Kelly.
According to the Los Angeles Times, Kelly had called Harbaugh a baby for the way he was handling some of his injuries, and said if he was still playing, he'd had told his defensive teammates to hit Harbaugh in the mouth and that he'd get rattled. Harbaugh didn't take lightly to those comments, and in a game in San Diego in which Kelly was working as an analyst, he showed up unannounced and confronted the former Bills quarterback, called Jim Kelly out of the meeting into a private room, and threw a couple of punches. The Colts quarterback broke a bone in his hand as a result, and missed the following 3 games. It was classed as a non-football injury, meaning Harbaugh missed out on his paychecks. The punches cost him playing time, and about $140,000 a week for the 3 games he missed. Harbaugh has since said he regretted punching Kelly, but his toughness was being questioned. And sometimes, you have to stand up for what you believe in. After spending a couple of seasons with the Baltimore Ravens and San Diego Chargers, Harbaugh retired as a player and headed straight into coaching.
Are you ready to play football to its highest level? And that means give up your body, sacrifice your body, all out, reckless, abandon.
Harbaugh had inherited a team that had gone 1-11 the previous season. This team wasn't ready to compete on the big stage, but they had Pete Carroll's USC coming up on the schedule. The Stanford Cardinals were the underdogs in that game by 41 points, and every time USC scored, Stanford seemed to fight their way back into it, wrapping up the game at 24-23. Harbaugh had upset the #1 team in the nation and embarrassed Pete Carroll and the Trojans, which became the beginning of one of the game's greatest coaching rivalries, spilling over into their NFL careers. But the most notorious incident between both coaches would occur 2 years later. Andrew Luck was the team's quarterback, and with the game well and truly put away, Harbaugh continued to run up the score. The matchup produced the now famous altercation during the post-game handshake, where the "what's your deal" phrase was born.
To meet Pete Carroll, who is not a happy camper, no question about it.
They don't seem very happy with each other.
The animosity between the two was clear, and you could cut the tension there at midfield with a knife.
Just like the human body, it actually craves content.
You know, they were too cool for school. Yeah, I'm going to Stanford. You know, I deserve it. I worked really hard in school. You know, they really are sitting on third base, but the problem is they think they hit a triple.
Harbaugh has come under fire in the past for creating an unwelcome culture at Stanford. He had helped to redefine the qualification process for student athletes at Stanford, and as a result, lowered the bar to get his top recruits into the program. With the new approach, Harbaugh was intending to scrap the white-collar perception of student athletes at Stanford, proudly stating, "We're going blue-collar, nothing but hard work." The guys he was bringing into the program were football guys first, who could get by with their grades. He's an outstanding recruiter, but as always, that meant bending the rules to fit his objective. Harbaugh wanted to win at all cost, and his players took on that approach. Winning was so important to them that at times they lacked class and refused to win quietly. His players' celebrations and taunting rubbed a lot of programs up the wrong way, and even some of those who loved Stanford were unsure about the new look the head coach was encouraging.
You mentioned Stanford. You played for Jim Harbaugh there, and now he's one of your biggest rivals. What was it like, and what is it like playing for and now playing against Coach Harbaugh?
Harbaugh's competitive nature rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including their star receiver. Many know Richard Sherman as the All-Pro, Super Bowl winning cornerback who dominated the NFL's best receivers for over a decade. But at Stanford, he was a young wide receiver yet to prove himself on the main stage, with Richard Sherman being one of the most intense defensive backs the NFL has ever seen. He hates being tested, doesn't take lightly to being doubted, and certainly had his moments with Harbaugh. According to reports, it was Richard Sherman's decision to ultimately move to defensive back. A knee injury had cut his 2008 season short, and when he returned in 2009, it was understood that his best position on the team was now going to be on defense. This was a wide receiver who had started to make a name for himself, who seemingly out of the blue dropped the position he knew best and transitioned to the defensive side right before his senior year. You'd have to wonder how the decision might impact his draft stock. Others have their theories about the switch, with many believing that it was actually to avoid spending much time around Jim Harbaugh. In November 2007, Harbaugh suspended Sherman for one game after drawing a personal foul late in a loss to the Washington Huskies, followed by a sideline meltdown in which the receiver was shouting at his teammates. Then in the 2 games that followed, Sherman caught just 1 pass for 5 yards. He was the team's leading receiver, but things started to look a little different.
In the secondary, the left corner, keep an eye on Richard Sherman.
Sherman's first mention of moving to defensive back came after that season. The following year brought the injury, and while Richard Sherman decided the best course of action was surgery, he hadn't mentioned it to Harbaugh. The Stanford head coach retaliated by telling Sherman he had quit on his team, opting for surgery in the middle of a season without running it by the coaching staff. The following season, he transitioned to corner. And some reports, including one published on NBC, believe that he had actually been banished from the offense by Harbaugh himself. The collision between the two followed them to the NFL. In the same year that Richard Sherman graduated and headed to the league, Jim Harbaugh had accepted the head coaching job with the San Francisco 49ers.
I'm excited about the San Francisco 49ers. I'm excited to meet the players and start building a great cathedral. I accept this competitive challenge willingly and look very much forward to it. Thank you.
The 49ers had gone 6-10 the previous season and were in desperate need of a revamp. They wanted to add some energy on defense, and the cornerback position was one of their most glaring needs. Naturally, Richard Sherman's name came up in the conversation, with the team apparently placing a 3rd-round grade on him, but Jim Harbaugh had other ideas. According to 49ers CEO Jed York, Harbaugh ripped Sherman's name off the team's draft board. He wanted nothing to do with one of his former players, and Sherman believes that those feelings spread throughout the league, with many believing Sherman could have been a day 2 draft pick. His eventual selection by the Seattle Seahawks in round 5 was a surprise. The cornerback himself believed that his former head coach, Jim Harbaugh, had been tarnishing his reputation when asked about the wide receiver, and it was Caroll who took a chance on him in the 5th round. The two both have their separate issues with Jim Harbaugh, and the feud would rise again a little later in their NFL journey. The team that Jim Harbaugh took over in San Francisco was in desperate need of a new approach. Harbaugh was a popular candidate in the league, quickly building a glowing resume as a type of coach who could turn any program around. His approach was intense, sometimes a little crazy, and there were more than a few that didn't particularly like him. In one of the ugliest scenes you'll ever see between 2 head coaches, Harbaugh once caused Lions head coach Jim Schwartz to completely lose his head.
I want to congratulate Coach Harbaugh and got shoved out of the way.
Post-game sportsmanship in general.
When shaking opponent's coach's hand, you know, you win a game like that, you're excited and things like that, but I think there's a protocol that goes with this league.
They beat the Lions 25-19, and Harbaugh celebrated emphatically. He ran out onto the field, pumping his fists on the way to meeting Schwartz halfway, and then shook his hand mid-celebration, causing Schwartz to completely lose his cool. The Lions coach then tried to track Harbaugh down through a body of players and media personnel, clearly irritated by the way in which both the game and the post-game niceties had played out.
Jim Schwartz, you can see in the white top and the gray pants there, yelling and screaming back at Harbaugh's direction. Some people putting their helmets back on their heads as if a fight is going to break out.
Despite coming up one stop short of the ultimate mission, Harbaugh received several accolades for his efforts, including the NFL Coach of the Year. In Harbaugh's 2nd season with the team, the 49ers would once again dominate the regular season. Just 2 seasons into his career as an NFL coach, Harbaugh was headed for the Super Bowl. Not only was he headed for the Super Bowl, but would face his brother John. John Harbaugh told a story once on the Pardon My Take podcast.
I see the sand come up around, it's dark, salt water, and all the air bubbles came out. But then he kind of keeps holding me down there, and the waves are coming, holds me down, holds me down, holds me down. I'm thinking this is going to be it. He snapped, he's gone. I've lost him.
Jim took the whole family on a beach vacation after getting a new contract from the Chicago Bears. While the kids played on the sand, Jim and John tussled in the ocean, and when Jim threw a hard leg kick his older brother's way, an all-out brawl kicked off.
He throws a single leg into my right leg as hard as he can. So I sprawl, full sprawl, cross face, right to his nose as hard as I can, just smash him right in the face.
To which Jim responded by tackling him and pushing him down under the water. John recalled that Jim held him down there just a little too long, and when he eventually let up, gave him a look as if to say, "You know what's up." That's how competitive they are, and that's how far Jim is willing to go to let even his own brother know that he isn't to be challenged. Unfortunately for Jim, he was on the wrong side of the fates that day, with his brother John claiming the ultimate bragging rights of a Super Bowl title. Even the Super Bowl had its controversies, and once again, Jim Harbaugh's name was in the middle of it.
So we took that out and put it up there so that I could see it and that everybody else saw it. All right, we lost lights.
There was an undeniable amount of uncertainty about the cause.
The clock stopped. For action on the field at the Super Bowl, eclipsed by the Super Blackout during the third quarter of last night's game. Officials say a, quote, abnormality in the power system triggered an automatic shutdown.
I didn't buy that at all, did you? Come on, San Francisco's getting their butts handed to them, and then they come back and there's a 93-yard run back, and then the lights go out, and then they go on to
almost win, yeah.
You mentioned Roger Goodell's name, the commissioner of the NFL's name. Are you like Ray? You think somebody pulled the plug?
Half the power in New Orleans Stadium, the Superdome here, is out.
We've never really gotten any answers as to why the lights went out in the Superdome that night, only that it was an abnormality in the power system. These things don't happen at high school games, and it had never happened at the Superdome in a game before either. But in the middle of the Super Bowl, the biggest stage of all, the power went out? Skeptics believe it was Harbaugh's 49ers that were behind the power outage. At the time, they were down 28-6 and in desperate need of something that would turn the tide. The outage caused a 34-minute delay, allowing both teams to gather themselves before returning to the field. For the 49ers, you could see why a 30-minute break as the game was slipping through their fingers would make sense. Time to adjust the scheme, coach the players, find a spark that would bring them back into it. As an isolated incident, blaming the outage on the 49ers just seems like hearsay, but it had already happened in one of their games.
The story being Ben Roethlisberger's ankle coming in, but the story quickly became, see the explosion, a power outage at Candlestick.
In 2011, during a game between the 49ers and the Pittsburgh Steelers at Candlestick Park, everything went dark.
6-0. Let's go to the second quarter, and what do you know? Turn them off. The lights went out again.
2 power outages for the same team over the course of 2 seasons? That has never happened before, nor has it happened since. Jim might not have won the Super Bowl against John, but it appeared as though he was going to be around for a very long time. But as it transpired, that was not the case, and things began to quickly unravel in San Francisco. As fast as he'd arrived and taken the NFL by storm, he was seemingly gone again. How could a coach who had come into the franchise and taken them to back-to-back NFC championship games and a Super Bowl experience, quite literally dragging them out of the mud, be outcasted so quickly? Part of it was a revenge game for Pete Caroll and Richard Sherman, who both had their own reasons to want to beat down on Jim Harbaugh. In Harbaugh's 3rd straight appearance in the playoffs, Caroll and Sherman finally got their chance. The 49ers had gone 12-4, Harbaugh's 3rd successful regular season, and won 2 playoff games that put them on a collision course to meet the Seattle Seahawks and the Legion of Boom in the NFC Championship game. The game was set to be extremely intense, with a wall of staff standing at the 50-yard line during team warm-ups to avoid any potential scuffle before the game got underway. It was one heck of a game too, with both sides making sensational plays.
He's the one who gets it loose, and Bennett pulling out throws. End zone, caught for the touchdown.
but none were more important than that of Richard Sherman. Kaepernick and the 49ers were 6 points down and driving, knowing a touchdown would win it. Sherman won the game for the Seahawks. Sherman had got his sweet revenge on the coach who stripped his name from the draft board just a few years earlier. Richard Sherman had plenty to say after the game too, with what is now one of the most famous sound bites of our generation.
When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get. Don't you ever talk about me. Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best, or I'm gonna shut it for you real quick.
That game would be the bitter end of Jim Harbaugh's supreme reign in the NFC. Richard Sherman had been quoted as saying it was personal and wanted to knock him out of the league. Jim Harbaugh has never spoken publicly about his feud with Sherman, but the All-Pro cornerback has several times made it clear that neither of them care at all for patching up their differences. In his 4th season with the 49ers, the wheels started to fall off. Harbaugh had wanted a contract extension from the team, but they had been reluctant to give him one. Jed York and Harbaugh had agreed to put the contract negotiations to the side until the close of the 2014 season. That season happened to be their worst.
3rd and goal. Rivers to throw for it. He's got his man in overtime. The approach. Novak. He knocks it through. Chargers win.
Regressing to an 8-8 record and missing the playoffs for the first time. After the final game of the season, it was announced that Jim and the 49ers had agreed to part ways. The reasons behind the breakdown in the coach-to-team relationship have never been made public, but there is a common understanding that Harbaugh and GM Trent Balk's relationship fell apart in such a way that it became irreparable. One of them was going to have to walk away, and with a looming opportunity in Michigan, Harbaugh stepped out. The two men had entered something of a power struggle, and according to reports, Balk and the front office convinced Jed York that the success the team was having was more to do with the roster they'd built and not the coaching itself. The former 49ers coach was on his way out, and later in his career came under fire for his comments about former quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who famously took a knee during the national anthem. Harbaugh initially scoffed at the gesture, but later walked back his comments, noting that he understood Kaepernick's right to do so. Harbaugh was out in San Francisco and was the immediate favorite for the vacant job at his alma mater, Michigan. Jim Harbaugh accepted the job as the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines on the 30th of December 2014 and turned the program around. The school he had once played for was now under his command, and in their very first year, the Wolverines went 10-3 and destroyed the Florida Gators with a 41-7 win in the Citrus Bowl. The Wolverines were certainly heading in the right direction, and Harbaugh was helping to bring them back into contention. But his critics had two major problems. Harbaugh couldn't beat Ohio State. His early years at Michigan weren't shy of controversy either. In 2016, Harbaugh was fined for a post-game rant after a loss to Ohio State, making sure his feelings about some outrageous calls were heard. 2 penalties called all day, Harbaugh said. Multiple holding penalties let go. Multiple false starts. The official on my side, who is supposed to be watching that, is concerned whether our coaches are in the coaches box or not. Their coaches were on the field, practically in the huddle at times. I'm bitter.
The officiating, I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today. That spot, the graphic display is the interference penalties. The one not called on us, on Grant Perry, clearly was being hooked before the ball got there. And the previous penalty they called on Delano Hill, the ball's uncatchable and by the receiver. See, I'm bitterly disappointed.
The Big Ten didn't take lightly to his comments either. He was backed by his players, and the whole thing brought a spotlight down on the conference. Unwanted attention aimed at the officials is never a good thing for those at the big table, and they promptly dished Harbaugh a fine, with a warning not to go after the officials in the future. One of the biggest battles Harbaugh faced came during a spat with the entire SEC. Jim Harbaugh had hosted 11 satellite camps in 7 states across the US, in what was considered to be a power move against some of the nation's biggest programs. Harbaugh's satellite camp tour included stops in California, Texas, and Florida, and the SEC coaches didn't take lightly to what they believed was a very obvious recruiting effort. Satellite camps are made up of smaller schools, inviting a college staff to coach at a camp. For example, the University of South Florida in Tampa invited Harbaugh and his Wolverine staff over to coach their camp, and when the staff accepts that invitation, it became a Michigan Wolverine satellite camp. For Michigan, these camps offered a look at recruits in other states, who they might not necessarily get to see had they not attended the camps. For the smaller school hosting the camp, they got a far better attendance because Jim Harbaugh's name was attached to the event. Both used to benefit from these satellite camps. But in early 2016, the NCAA banned them. The SEC had lobbied against Jim Harbaugh and coaches such as Nick Saban, Dan Mullen, and Hugh Freeze to stop him from crossing state lines and coaching at camps around the country. He had taken a summer swarm tour that featured his 9-day, 7-state tour of various camps at smaller schools. Nick Saban was particularly vocal about the camps, making his thoughts very clear that it was an obvious recruiting trip. Any coach and his staff could visit other camps. But Jim Harbaugh was savvy enough to take advantage of such events more than any other college football coach. In doing so, he clearly created a lot of enemies. Harbaugh's often erratic behavior gripped national headlines in 2017. Paul Feinbaum had plenty to say about the Michigan man. Feinbaum said that he was the Donald Trumpy of college football, as he was always stealing the headlines for some outlandish reason. The Wolverines coach always pushed the envelope, and did so again after the NCAA ruled against him in his satellite camps. A rule was put in place that banned college football teams from practicing off campus during school when their sport is out of season. After the shortened COVID season, Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan hit its greatest peak. He did a good job in bringing back-to-back winning seasons, but he was yet to beat Ohio State and yet to win the Big Ten. His critics doomed him for that fact, and Feinbaum, for one, once again showed no remorse in detailing Harbaugh's failures against the Buckeyes. Then on November 27, 2021 in Ann Arbor, Harbaugh destroyed the narrative, with the Wolverines beating Ohio State 42-27. He then commented on Buckeyes coach Ryan Day, stating, "Some people are born on third base and act like they've hit a triple."
Underneath, intercepted. Michigan, Will Johnson jumped the route, cross forward, and has it at the 5-yard line.
Michigan had a great chance at making their way back to the playoffs, and perhaps this time, reaching the final. Harbaugh was seemingly at the very peak of his career, but the 2023 season would become ravaged by allegations and scandals, and some of the most serious offenses Harbaugh had ever been accused of. The first major issue came to light in the build-up to the 2023 season, with the NCAA launching an investigation into Harbaugh for possible recruiting violations. He had been accused of meeting with 2 recruits for cheeseburgers during the COVID-19 period, a time in which coaches were not allowed to recruit. The receipt for cheeseburgers gave evidence that Harbaugh had in fact broken the rules. But perhaps worse was his attempt to cover it up and get away with it. The NCAA came down on him. And despite both sides initially agreeing to a 4-game suspension, the NCAA then backed out of that agreement and said the investigation was still ongoing. Michigan then responded by internally suspending Harbaugh for the first 3 games of the 2023 season. Michigan's athletic director said, "While the ongoing NCAA matter continues through the NCAA process, today's announcement is our way of addressing mistakes that our department has agreed to in an attempt to further that process." The Wolverines players protested the suspension, lining up in a single-file formation in tribute to their coach. Harbaugh's 3-game suspension was just the beginning of the problems he faced in 2023, and not long after returning, the news outbreak surrounding the team and their sign-stealing allegations made national headlines. In October of 2023, it had been reported that the NCAA was once again investigating Michigan, this time over a potential sign-stealing allegation. Teams are allowed to steal signs, it happens all the time, but they are not allowed to send team personnel to scout future opponents at their games, and they're not allowed to record or use any tech to steal signs. The allegations dated back to 2021, and at the heart of it was a man named Connor Stalions, who was an off-field analyst for the team. Stalions was apparently buying tickets to opponents' games and then sending people to those games to steal signs. Michigan suspended Stalions in October, and he was fired in November. The NCAA found no evidence that Harbaugh was in any way linked to the scandal, but he was still facing a potential punishment for the situation occurring under his watch. Other Big Ten coaches had apparently chimed in and demanded the NCAA NCAA punished Michigan and Harbaugh for the situation. And before the clash with Penn State, he was suspended for the final 3 games of the regular season.
Word has come down for the Big Ten. Michigan fans will not be happy. Jim Harbaugh suspended for the final 3 games of the regular season. That's the decision of the Big Ten.
The NCAA made it clear that the punishment was one for Michigan and not for Harbaugh directly. He would be allowed to coach at practice during the week, but would be suspended from the sidelines for the Wolverines' remaining games. The team responded by once again protesting the suspension. Quarterback J.J. McCarthy tweeted, "Bet," and most of the rest of the Michigan players did the same. It was a quote tweeted by former Wolverine and NFL legend Tom Brady too, who also tweeted, "Bet." The Wolverines responded by winning all 3 of those games and entering the college football playoffs as the #1 team in the country. Harbaugh had been stalled twice in the 2023 season, missing 6 games on the sideline, but his team had rallied, and there was no better way to retaliate than to make a run at the national championship. Michigan defeated Ohio State for the 3rd season in a row, and then edged past Alabama in a 27-20 victory in the playoff semi-final. The win set up a final matchup with the Washington Huskies in 2023 with his back against the wall and the entire college football world trying to tear him down. Jim Harbaugh overcame it all. Harbaugh's success at Michigan caused renewed interest from NFL teams.
It is now expected to get done. The Chargers land Jim Harbaugh. This is real. This is not a drill. After many years.
One of the greatest football coaches of our generation, a tenacious leader who turned clubs into winning organizations. However, not without leaving a trail of controversy, allegations, and scandal.
Who's got it better than us? Nobody!